Good morning. Today we're continuing our reading of The Wild Robot Escapes by Peter Brown. I am making this recording with permission from Little Brown Books for Young Readers. Let's continue. Chapter 53. The Farm Country. During their travels, our friends passed every kind of farm imaginable. Some farms grew crops in vast fields and orchards. Some grew crops in great glimmering greenhouses. Some farms let their animals graze through open pastures. Others kept their animals confined to small enclosures. Some farms had old-fashioned barns and sheds. Others had modern laboratories that made meat, eggs, and milk without any animals at all. There seemed to be an infinite number of ways to produce food for humans. The farms were teeming with robot workers, and Roz couldn't resist spying on them as she carefully slunk past. The robots worked the fields and machines and livestock, their bodies shining in the sun, shimmering in the heat. This must have been how Roz looked back on the Hilltop Farm. Were any of these robots like her? Were any of them quietly dreaming of escape? Or were they all just mindless machines, content with their place in the world? Chapter 54, The Mountains. The flat plains of farm country gradually rolled into hills and valleys. There were fewer crop fields and more forests. The hills grew taller, and the valleys sank deeper. The farms disappeared entirely. Our friends had reached the mountains. Brightbill floated on the wind as Roz climbed the slopes. They passed craggy formations and rushing waterfalls and lush meadows with flowers. The robot would have hiked on and on, never slowing or stopping, but the goose needed to rest. As the stars came out each evening, they found a safe location to settle down. Frost was common in the higher regions, and Roz took the lighter from her tool belt and built small campfires to keep her son warm. They sat around the crackling flames, reminiscing about life on the island, until Brightbill drifted off to sleep. As the sun came up each morning, they'd clear away all traces of their campsite and set off again, deeper into the mountains. Eagles perched on jagged cliffs. Fish splashed through gurgling streams. Chipmunks bickered in the thick undergrowth. It felt good to be back in the wilderness, but this place wasn't home, so the travelers kept a brisk pace. The robot adjusted her camouflage to match her surroundings. In the forest, she wore leaves and tree bark. In the meadows, she wore grass and wildflowers. In the rocky terrain, she wore dirt and weeds. Even when they were out there in the wilderness, she wanted to go unseen. What Roz didn't realize was that she was already being watched. Chapter 55, The Attack. Wide mountain meadows made the robot nervous. While hiking through them, she felt exposed and easy to spot. Camouflage helped, but it was hard not to notice a walking clump of wildflowers, especially one accompanied by a goose. And it was one of those wide meadows that trouble caught up to our friends. In the corner of her eye, Roz sensed movement. She turned, but saw only tall grass blowing in the breeze. Then a twig snapped, but the sound was swallowed by a distant roll of thunder. It wasn't until the wind changed and a musky sift wafted by the robot that she understood the danger. "I smell wolves," said the robot. Brightbill's eyes grew big and round, and he whispered back, "What do we do?" Before Roz could reply, two wolves leaped out from the brush. They charged toward the robot, snapping and snarling with their jaws. Roz heaved her son toward the sky so that he could fly to safety, and then burst into a sprint. The robot zigged and zagged across the meadow, trying to shake off the wolves. But when she dashed through a patch of soft ground, she slipped and toppled into the grass. The wolves quickly surrounded their prey, heads low, ears drawn back, deep growls rumbling in their teeth. "Remember us, Roz?" said the huge male with a scar. "Hello again, Shadow," said the robot, slowly getting to her feet. "And I believe your name is Barb." "You have a good memory," said the female wolf. Actually, I have a perfect memory, said the robot. And yet you've forgotten your rifle. A toothy smile appeared on Shadow's face. You aren't so tough without your rifle, are you? Barb sniffed the breeze. Where's your pet goose? And then she saw Brightbill perched in a lone tree in the middle of the meadow. He is not my pet, said Roz. He is my son. Shadow chuckled. We've heard stories about the robot mother and her son, the goose. They're very touching. He turned and barked. Join us, Brightbill. We'd love to see you up close. Stay where you are, son, hollered Roz. I will take care of them. You'll take care of us? Growled Shadow. No, Barb and I will take care of you. The robot's computer brain hummed as it tried to make a plan. The wolves were stalking toward her. Any second now they would attack. Roz had to do something, anything. So she stalled. Shadow, Barb, is it just the two of you? Roz scanned the meadow for the other wolves. She couldn't find their pack. Where is the rest of your pack? Well, that was the wrong question to ask, because the fur on Shadow's back stood up and he snarled, This is my pack now! Then the wolves pounced. But Roz wasn't there. With all the strength in her legs, the robot launched herself up and away, and now she was soaring through the air in a long, graceful arc. Once her feet stomped back to the ground, she launched herself up and away again. With giant arcing strides, the robot bounded across the meadow in the direction of her son. At first, the wolves were baffled by the robot's strange escape, but they were expert hunters. They raced after her, studying her closely, watching where she landed. And when Roz made her final leap toward Brightbill's tree, a heavy paw knocked her off balance. She tumbled through the air and slammed against the trunk. Leaves shook loose, dead branches crashed down, and the robot held tight to the tree. You okay, Ma? Said the goose as he fluttered down to his mother's side. Just some light scrapes, said the robot, and she pulled herself onto a sturdy branch. Below the tree, the wolves were howling with laughter. Nice try, Roz, said Shadow. But you can't outrun us. Wolves are built for chasing. You are wasting your time, said the robot. You cannot eat me, and you will never catch my son. You still don't get it, Roz, growled the wolf. I'm not hunting you for food. I'm hunting you for revenge. Chapter 56. The Torch. Our friends were stuck in that tree. They sat in the upper branches, high above the wolves, trying to calculate an escape. Brightbill could fly off whenever he liked, but Roz had to come down eventually. And when she did, the wolves would be ready. Shadow and Barb stretched out in the shade. They glanced around and licked their fur and sniffed the mountain air. The wolves looked comfortable, and yet there was tension between them. I'm hungry, growled Barb. I want to eat rabbits or deer or maybe go back to farm country and prey on livestock. Anything is better than hunting a creature that can't be eaten. You can eat all the animals you like, said Shadow, after we kill the robot. Barb grumbled with frustration. She didn't understand Shadow's need for revenge. But for now, she stayed loyal to her mate. Day turned to night, and the wolves started yawning. Barb's eyelids became heavy, Shadow's body became weary, and the soothing song of the crickets lulled them both to sleep. The sight of sleeping wolves reminded Roz of those long winter nights on the island, when wild animals crawled into her warm home and slept. She remembered how frightened they looked when they saw the fire for the first time. And this gave Roz an idea. Quietly, she broke off a dead branch from the tree trunk. Then she took the lighter from her tool belt and held a flame under the branch's knobby end until it was blazing. And then she dropped down to the ground. Shadow and Barb snapped awake to find the world bathed in orange light. Towering above them, looking like a demon, was the robot. Her eyes were glowing, her mouth was roaring. In her hand was a torch, flames rippling, embers whirling into the air. The wolves had never seen fire. It was beautiful, and it was terrible. Deep inside, they felt their wolf instincts telling them that this ball of swirling light was dangerous. Their instincts told them to run for their lives, and when Roz lunged toward them, they ran. Barb yelped, Shadow whimpered, and the two wolves raced away from the fire as fast as they could. Chapter 57. The Stones. At first light, Roz nudged Brightville awake, and the travelers continued north through the mountains. The goose stood on his mother's shoulders as she marched. His eyes darted around nervously, searching for any sign of the wolves. But the wolves were gone, and our friends turned their attention to a new problem. The weather out here there was always changing. Roz and Brightville had seen many calm, sunny days suddenly turn to wind or fog or sleet or even snow. Our friends expected bad weather, so they hardly noticed when heavy rain came sweeping down a valley. But there was something odd about this rain. Brightville squinted at the oncoming storm and said, Ma, why is the rain bouncing off of the ground? Bouncing rain? That didn't seem right. The robot's computer brain went to work as she found the correct word. That is not rain, she said. That is hail. Clang! A hailstone bounced off of Roz's chest. Another swooshed into the weeds. Then the sky opened up, and hailstones were everywhere. They tore through leaves and branches. They ricocheted off rocks and roots. They flattened flowers and bushes. To the robot, the hailstones were annoying. To the goose, they were deadly. A stone hit Brightville's right shoulder and he fell to the ground. Roz scooped him up, hunching over, protecting him from falling stones, but the hailstorm might kill the poor bird if they don't find cover soon. Frantically, the robot scanned the area for any type of shelter. And there it was. On the far side of the valley, beside a winding river, was a cabin. It was old and shabby, but it still had a roof, and that's what our friends needed the most. She held her son close, pumped her legs, and thundered across the valley. Heavy hailstones hissed into the grass and squelched into the mud and clanged off of our robot. There was a soft thump, and Brightville cried out in pain. Roz bounded over the rushing river in a single leap, landed without breaking stride, and kept running. Now that she could hear hailstones cracking against the cabin, louder and louder, she knew she was getting close. The robot stomped up to the front door, turned the handle, and stepped inside. Chapter 58. The Cabin. The hailstorm was brief, but violent. Its icy stones were quickly melting away, but the damage would linger on. The valley was littered with shredded leaves and wildflowers. Wounded animals were hobbling back to their homes. Several unlucky birds lay limp in the grass. Inside the cabin, Roz was standing by the window. She held Brightville in her arms, his bruised body wrapped in an old blanket. The robot knew everything there was to know about caring for animals, but all her son needed was time. His injuries would heal on their own. Go on without me, Ma, said the goose in a weak voice. I'll catch up to you when I'm feeling better. That is ridiculous, said the robot. What kind of mother would leave her son injured behind? But Ma... Stop talking, interrupted Roz. You need to rest. Brightville tried to argue, but he was already falling asleep. The cabin was simple, just a square room with a wood stove, 2 chairs beside a table, and a couple of cots sitting in the corner. Dusty mugs and bowls sat on a shelf, otherwise the walls were bare. It was clear no humans had been there for a very long time. However, it seemed that some other creature had moved in. The whole place had a foul odor. Lumps of feces were strewn about, and little footprints trailed away from a dark hole in the floor. Roz leaned over the hole, and in the language of the animals, she said, "Hello, is anyone down there?" Something moved, and then a pair of shining eyes looked up from the darkness. Who are you? I didn't invite you to my home. I am sorry to intrude, said the robot. My son and I are only trying to escape the hailstorm. Your son, said the voice. Is that him in your arms? Let me see. Very gently, the robot lifted a fold of cloth and revealed the sleeping goose. He must take after his father. He is my adopted son, the robot explained. My name is Roz, and this is Brightbill. The shining eyes blinked, and the voice squeaked with excitement. You're Roz and Brightbill! The birds have been singing about you for months! You're living legends! Technically, I am not living, said the robot. You seem pretty alive to me, said the voice. Either way, it's nice to meet you. They call me Sprinkles. With that, the creature crawled up through the hole in the floor. She was covered in black fur from her nose all the way to the tip of her fluffy tail. Well, except for those white stripes running down her back. You see, Sprinkles was a skunk. The robot took one look at her and stepped backward. Sprinkles frowned. You know, Roz, skunks only get stinky when we're nervous or frightened. Are you nervous now? Well, sorta, but in a good way. I'm honored to meet you. Please pull up a seat and tell me what brings you here. Sprinkles hopped onto the table and listened as Roz described their journey. The skunk was a very good listener. While Roz spoke, Sprinkles nodded politely and said things like, Oh my, and is that right? And you don't say. This went on until Brightbill began to stir. Ma, I'm thirsty, he whispered. There's a creek right out back, said Sprinkles, and those might be useful. She motioned to the bowls on the shelf. Please help yourself to anything. My home is your home. It turns out skunks can be quite hospitable. Sprinkles invited the visitors to stay as long as they liked, and so our friends spent Brightbill's recovery in the cabin. The goose mostly slept. The robot brought him water and food. The skunk made sure they were both comfortable. A few mornings later, sunlight streamed in through the window and onto Brightbill. He was squawking and waddling and fluttering through the cabin. His injuries had healed, and he was eager to continue their journey. Thank you for everything, Sprinkles, the robot waved as she marched away from the cabin with her son on her shoulder. Glad I could help, said the skunk. Misunderstood creatures like us, we've got to look out for each other.